Okay, we are now recording. So hi everyone, my name is Sam Danowski. I'm the State Director of Sierra Club Connecticut. Use she, her pronouns. Very happy to be here with you tonight. I'd like to take a few minutes for a welcome. And this is a diversity welcome that we like to do to welcome all people to this space and make it an inclusive place for everyone. I'd like to welcome people of African descent, Black, African American, Asian, Arab descent, European descent, those who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, people indigenous to this land, and people of mixed multiple descents. Welcome. I'd like to welcome people of all ages, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I'm glad you're all here. Welcome. Welcome to all genders, women, men, trans, genderqueer, and all sexual orientations, queer, bi, gay. I welcome you here. Welcome all religious traditions, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindi, Buddhist, and those that are agnostic, atheist, and others. You are welcome here. I welcome all the languages that we speak. Welcome. Indigenous people occupied this land thousands of years before the first European explorers arrived. Connecticut is the land of many American Indian tribes, including but not limited to the Nipmuc, Mohegan, Pequot, Niantic, Paugussett, and Schaghticoke. These people were decimated by the arrival of Europeans through disease, violence, and the occupation of land. I'd like to welcome the spirits of those that lived in the land where we are now. And I welcome all of you and thank you for being here. So again, just a little reminder on the Zoom, stay on mute during the presentation. Hold your questions until the end. We'll have plenty of time for questions with Mary, and use the chat to introduce yourself. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mary Pelletier. Mary's a native of Kansas, has been living in Connecticut since 1997. She utilizes her architecture, landscape, and urban design training with respect for nature by developing strategies to conserve and revitalize natural resources in cities. Her work focuses on improving designed relationships between water and vibrant ecosystems with high-density urban suburban areas. She also assists local
Just muted yourself.
Sorry. She also assists local communities advancing interdisciplinary education by arranging field activities such as planting projects and cleanups. Mary is a founding director of Park Watershed, an urban suburban stewardship organization for the Park River Regional Watershed, which stretches through the city of Hartford to the Connecticut River. And Mary, I'm thrilled to have you with us. Thank you. I'm very excited for your presentation. So take it away.
Hi, and I am going to share my screen and then start the slideshow. And again, Park Watershed, a lot of this presentation has been developed through the work of Park Watershed, which stretches east of the Metacomet Ridge across West Hartford. 99% of West Hartford is within the Park River Regional Watershed, and then it flows, as many people know, into the Connecticut River. So this work with urban suburban communities is really because I'm interested in the relationship of nature and the city. And over time, that nature and the city eventually, in a high density urban area, I'm going to mute this right over here. In a high density urban area, we lose the landscape over time because of the development. But the last most important area that we need to keep within the city is the riparian corridors. And so this is a winter picture, and but it does still show the framework, the structure around what is a riparian corridor. We have in the summer, of course, the tree canopy shading, and through that there's insects, there's migratory birds, there's a floodplain, there's often a woodland slope, there's aquatic life, macroinvertebrates, and along this whole area, throughout this whole circle of life, there's the migration of wildlife, aquatic life, avian life, and again, insects. And this is particularly important because these ecosystem service benefits are what we're likely and are increasingly losing. And water is increasingly important. So this presentation, I'm encouraging everyone to protect their riparian corridor in their neighborhood. And this I see as a sort of upstream 21st century evolution of nature and the city. Through the Clean Water Act, we've protected the big monumental waters and of the Connecticut River, the Long Island Sound, and there's a lot of work we need to do in those areas. But as we advance our ability to work locally, we can also look at the riparian corridors or even the intermittent streams in our own backyard, and we can recognize the exponential benefits of those healthy ecosystems. But we need you to work with your friends, your neighbors, your elected officials to ask them to change their thinking about these riparian corridors and neighborhoods. And so as I go through this presentation, I will be giving you a series of opportunities. If you're in an MDC, the Metropolitan District, in their drinking water of their voting member towns, you could vote, or you could let them know what you think. But also the GC3, we'll talk about that, the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And then in 2022, the anniversary of Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted, who's born and buried in Hartford. It's another opportunity to make a difference. So where's the Park River Regional Watershed within the state? It's right here. It's this little metropolitan area. And if I could just say, somebody's not on mute, and it may be Samantha, but if you could just make sure everybody is muted. I am hearing some voices in the background. So these red areas are the developed areas in our state. This is Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, New London over here. And I believe this is Danbury. And as you can see, there's a lot of urban areas in the state, but there's also a lot of forested or suburban or ex-urban areas. And within the greater Connecticut River watershed, these areas seem relatively small. However, the majority of the population is now living in cities, and our city life needs to be connected to nature. And we're finding that there's multiple benefits. And just to iterate, there were many communities prior to the European development of of our landscapes that are really, more connected to the land. And of course, these were tribal lands. We're just beginning to learn more about those relationships. But I pulled up this slide to just remind people, this is the area of the Park River watershed, right in here, the Metacomet Ridge, through these areas, through these tribal lands. So again, here's that boundary of the Park River Regional Watershed. This is the Metacomet Ridge, which, if watersheds are like a bathtub with a scupper to the side, or a land area that flows into or drains into a distinct water body. Here's the Park River, the whole area. This is the North Branch. We'll be focusing on this as our case study example, and the South Branch, which includes all of Trout Brook, Bass Brook, and Piper Brook down in Newington. We can look across the watershed in many different places. Of course, at Hugh Tower, which is on the Metacomet Ridge. We are looking in this slide east to the skyline of the Connecticut River, but also, of course, the skyline of downtown Hartford. And as many people know, the last few miles of the Park River carry 78 square mile drainage area into the Connecticut River via a buried conduit that's underneath I-84. However, that is certainly not the only area within the Park River Regional Watershed. The North Branch Park River Regional Watershed is a 28 square mile watershed that includes 68% of Bloomfield, and 17% of that watershed is in West Hartford. Only 11% is in Hartford, but that 11% is the drainage area for the majority of the 28 square mile watershed area. So how a watershed works, this, if you would ask, these are our neighborhoods that we're going to be zeroing in on. You want to keep an eye out for this little hairpin turn, which you'll see throughout this presentation. This is the main stem of the North Branch Park River watershed. It receives all of the drainage area from these basins, from these upper basins, from Washbrook, from Beemans Brook, from Philly Brook, and from Tumbledown Brook or Tumblebrook. So what does that look like to many people is that a land use map makes it look like a developed area. I think from those previous slides, if you were a conservation or a forester, you would look at it and think there's no forests there, right? It's all one big parking lot because that's what that red signifies. And these little green dots are maybe inconsequential to the efforts in the past, the 20th century efforts to conserve nature. They're looking for much bigger patches in the past to protect. But the work that I'm doing is about revitalization and conservation within the fabric of the city. And what I've found is that one of these little dots right here is actually a beautiful space within our cities. And some people are maybe familiar with some of the Trout Brook landscapes in West Hartford, and those would be these tiny little dots over here, barely registering on these land use maps. But again, those are the corridors with which within our neighborhoods, the wildlife, the tree canopy, the ecosystem services are happening. And this is an opportunity for all of us to think about what is conservation going to be in the 21st century. And I must admit, I was trying to redo this slide today, but I did not get around to it. But what it shows is this rectangle here to scale is Central Park in New York City, which everyone knows is a large area. And then this is in the background over here, the North Branch of the Park River, which is about a 5-mile stretch. So you can see that to scale in relationship to Central Park. And then this collaged image over here is Muddy River. And the Muddy River links Back Bay in Boston through Jamaica Pond, through the Arnold Arboretum, and through Franklin Park. And this Back Bay Muddy River project and Central Park are 19th century parks that were developed by Frederick Law Olmsted, a native of Hartford who's actually buried in the family tomb in the North End. And we can really embrace him as a role model for the 21st century by asking ourselves, what can we do to conserve nature in the city moving forward in the 21st century to scale at a much larger effort than maybe we've been thinking recently. Why? Well, these devastating images of the fire are not revealing what's going on with wildlife. And it's bad enough to see what's happening. But this article came out on September 15th, just a few days ago. It's about how flocks of birds are just appearing dead in thousands of birds in New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas. And many of them think that they have been overcome by drought and record heat waves. And it's important. It's to not turn away from these images and to realize we need to do something in the Northeast now to conserve landscapes that can host water. Water will be the critical factor. We are going through a drought right now, and there is still water on these riparian corridors. We must conserve that landscape. And I'm sure many of you all know that we are in the midst of a pandemic. It's creating a recession, but climate change is quickly catching up with us. So these are scary prospects. There's no doubt about it. And yet there's plenty of things we can do. We all have our municipal plans of conservation and development. And even though, although this plan was for the city of Hartford was approved in May of 2020, and we won't be gathering together like this summer, there's efforts afoot that amongst the planning community and amongst the people of our state, where we can begin to tell our elected officials, and especially our planners, our municipal planners, to actually do something to conserve more nature rather than just planning economic development. Because we can create green transformative jobs. Unfortunately, that message didn't necessarily get through to the powers that be. In Hartford, you can see that they have identified in the plan work to conserve nature in some respects, but they're not recognizing the opportunity to create a park along the North Branch of the Park River, as you see here. They're more focused on development issues. And we need to try to merge these goals of preserving nature in the city and creating districts, green districts, and green zones. I think we can do that through the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And right now, there will be a public comment phase opening soon. People are saying that will be next week, but there's really nothing on the website. But the Governor's Council on Climate Change, or the GC3, you can actually go to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's website. These are places where we can ask our state leaders to really change the game about what we want our communities to focus on for the 21st century. New green job opportunities, of course, rather than planning infrastructure for commuter life. There could be a pilot that implements a whole range of interdisciplinary policies that help reduce the silos of conflicting policies that we may have seen in the past, like putting solar arrays on farms out in the hinterlands. And of course, there's a long list of reasons, and I'm going to keep moving and maybe go back to this slide when we have our Q&A, because a lot of the reasons why we're doing this is, again, because all of these green strategies, green infrastructure strategies, green jobs can improve this long list of things at a much more cost-effective ways. And when we build today, we are really building our earth, because as we run out of resources, the most important thing to understand is that every building we build has a piece of the earth within it, and we can include nature in our building. And because nature is a most exquisite builder, and the trees are turning out to be our heroes, and that is certainly true on riparian corridors. This is the bridge over the North Branch of the Park River here, and this exquisite tree, as most of us all know, stores carbon for decades. It generates oxygen and absorbs CO2, and it puts that carbon in its magnificent limbs, which really, I counted these out, there's 16 huge limbs to this tree that are as big, or if not bigger, than the trees around it. So we want to mitigate our urban heat islands, host a of course, a lot of birds need the tree canopies. Migratory birds nest in them, and they return to the mature trees where they were born. These tree canopies intercept airborne dust. They reduce flooding, and they prevent soil erosion, and they even increase property values. And what's not on this list is the benefit of trees to our mental health. So, of course, we've all recognized that the recent Hurricane Aisha had created, as this headline says, historic devastation. There were multiple headlines, all of them with somebody in a chainsaw, because many people are removing the mature trees from their properties, and cities are also removing trees from parks. This is Elizabeth Park in Hartford, Connecticut. And these mature trees are being removed from parks, partially because our parks are increasingly being used as athletic fields. And the mature trees, such as the ones in the background, again at Elizabeth Park, are being replaced by new trees, by cultivars from Weston Nursery, from a nursery from outside of the city or even outside of the state. But you can see just the size of this tree is not does not have the capacity to provide the benefits that a mature tree has. And when you think about that, it's not that we ought to not be cutting down trees in parks because there's valid reasons for these concerns, but we need to look for places where mature trees can live out their full dynamic life cycle, which means they can age, they can stand as a dead snag in a forest and be nesting for wildlife and for birds, that they can fall over and slowly decay, and they can release their nutrients back into the soil. They can be a harbor for dens for wildlife and for insects. And there's extraordinary I don't know if diversity is the word when you go through the forest along the riparian corridors, because often these trees in these riparian corridors, because of the combination of the volatile floodplain, the volatile rivers, the dynamic of our changing waters, and the sort of overlooked forests, they're actually really the densest areas in all of our cities. This is a case study in Hartford, but you can see how dense the trees are along this riparian corridor right through here. These are the hillsides. Typically, it's actually the hillsides rather than the floodplains, which have been developed as parking lots, that host the most trees. And here's Elizabeth Park, where I was showing photographs, and you can see that a lot of the trees in these areas, here's a 10 courts,
It was
there's
cool. It didn't occur to me.
someone tennis courts, the baseball diamonds, dog parks, rose gardens. There's a lot of things that go on in city parks, but again, the riparian corridors given over to the nature that we desperately need to protect, even in cities. And in the past, this happened in 1897, really right after this sort of extraordinary several decades of Europeans, farming our New England landscapes that basically denuded our cities. This is the North Branch. So this photograph, is of this same landscape right here. The bridge, you can't even see the bridge. There's so many trees around it, but this tree where my arrow is now is over probably about here in this picture. It may have existed at this time or it may grew up later, but you can see this is an entirely different landscape. And that landscape was planned by individuals in the past who began to conserve and set aside lands for parks such as Bushnell Park in Hartford. And I do have a slide of that, which we will see later. But this is happening again, where we're again looking into the future and wanting our communities, either through our plans of conservation and development or through the GC3 project that the governor has initiated, the Governor's Council on Climate Change, asking what should our communities look like in the next 100 years. And the New England Landscape Futures program has done this work, and you can go look at that. Actually, just you can actually go to New England Landscape Futures or parkwatershed.org, and you can skip to the maps or read the different scenarios, or you can just start, looking for these conversations in your own communities and start them yourself and say, do we want in Hartford a park or a hog river? Now, a lot of people want to just call the river the Hog River, but I don't think they really want a parking lot. I think people want beautiful everywhere, want beautiful scenic riparian landscapes, healthy nature, opportunities to access beautiful, healthy communities. Now, in the past, this designing of communities had a really rather awful strategy, which was the redlining. And I want to just highlight the impacts of redlining in our cities. Redlining was a federal policy act, and it had created neighborhoods considered hazardous, definitely declining, still declining. And it characterized that by people's ethnic or racial identities, and those communities were discriminated against in receiving insurance for housing. And it was a federal policy, and it's had long-lasting implications. This was instituted in 1938. But as you can see in Hartford, these neighborhoods have lost their tree canopy. These are still the poorest neighborhoods. Many of the labels, such as best, which is for West Hartford, or still desirable, which is for the west end of Hartford, are still sticking to these neighborhoods. And we need to move beyond that and recognize that our landscapes contribute to the health and welfare and value of communities everywhere. And again, this is an example of redlining. This is the north end of Hartford. Over here is the west end of Hartford, and then this is West Hartford. And the NELF people studied the tree canopies and how these tree canopies are likely to impact communities. And then recently, the New York Times developed a map of how the higher summer temperatures in Richmond, Virginia, which whatever city you may be near, whether it's Bridgeport or New Haven, all cities that probably have the same pattern, where the pavement area creates a heat island, and the neighborhoods that have more trees that weren't redlined communities are cooler by as much as 5 to 20 degrees cooler, which can be extremely impactful to people's health. So as you move forward thinking, what can you do? We want to participate in improving our own yard, our own neighborhoods, our own community properties, but we also want to support and encourage the work of others and other neighborhoods, including low and moderate income neighborhoods, to seek and achieve healthy nature, because those help improve and support quality of life. And I think sometimes in Hartford, there's like one community is pitted against another by maybe planning conventions that aren't particularly helpful, that we need to really address head on. So even though these redlining policies have left us, our city planners, our COGs, our transportation planners are still planning for growing communities. This is the existing development parcels in Bloomfield. And you can see they're expecting to develop out Bloomfield to a great extent. This is a considerable build out, and these are typically the low income and a lot of wetland areas, and that will send more flooding and impairments downstream into the Hartford neighborhoods. And this is already happening where we're seeing a lot of flooding in Hartford because of the increase of development in upstream communities such as Bloomfield and West Hartford. And in not only is it the development, the hardscapes, the more houses and more storage facilities are a big development strategy. Of course, the Amazon storage facility, but also businesses like the Colt Firearms and its surrounding metals. This is actually along the South Branch. They just moved over the town line into West Hartford, but they have been permitted to discharge just upstream of the town line. So even though these businesses aren't paying taxes in Hartford, they're discharging their presumably voluntarily cleaned water into the Trout Brook. This is Trout Brook along here. This is Piper Brook, and then that flows into Hartford. So we're back to the North Branch here. The same thing happens in the North Branch, where the North Branch is impaired by Bloomfield and West Hartford before it even flows into the city of Hartford due to 23 permitted facilities and 23 permitted industries and 36 permitted facilities that are allowed to discharge water into the North Branch, plus channelization, stormwater runoff, and combined sewage overflows. But it's not all that grim, and that's part of the point. Is even in Hartford, there's work we can do to conserve the North Branch. So wherever you are, it would be great if these upstream communities would take responsibility for what they're sending downstream, but downstream communities can also take responsibility for making their streams better. So it turns out we don't have to go to the top of the watershed to clean our stream. We can add forests along our watershed. So this is a winter picture of this area, but if you see behind me, I don't know if you have all the images of everyone, but the picture that I use behind me is actually of this very same area, just on a beautiful fall day. And so that water quality is moderately impaired as opposed to severely impaired. And that's actually a good thing, because as we move downstream and we get outflows such as this, that again, a permitted discharge, there's considerable pollutants, and you can see how the water quality declines because of these permitted discharges. Again, this is the beautiful area that has a forest around it on a different season. And the reason why we need to step up the pace is that none of this land is protected. There's been a number of developments, including if you drive along Albany Avenue, you can see a huge development along Westbrook Village. And, there's ongoing development in these neighborhoods, and the patchwork of protected lands is not necessarily surrounding our riparian corridors. And that we need to change in the 21st century. And that's where actually the name of Park Watershed is based on the first public park set aside by public fund in the United States, and that's Bushnell Park. So 100 years ago or so, 150 years ago, the people looked forward to the future and wanted to make their communities better. And they did that by setting aside parkland, and by setting aside parkland, they cleaned industrial sites. Actually, Bushnell Park had been basically a brownfield. The railroad tracks, which are over here, had run through the park up to the Connecticut River to carry goods from the Connecticut River, but it became more of a passenger railroad and began to turn. And then that created the opportunity to build Bushnell Park with the river running through it. Admittedly, the river is buried now, but the concept is still good. And we can begin to take this tiny little patch of land, Bushnell Park, and be inspired at how it and Central Park has generated greater parks such as Keeney Park, Pembroke Park, Batterson Pond. These parks grew, Elizabeth Park, from this, and of course Central Park in New York City. And so again, I hold out the North Branch of the Park River, which has a variety of stakeholders. I don't see it being conserved by one entity, or being as Bushnell Park was in the past, or Central Park was. Central Park was purchased, all the land was purchased and put into, you know, the municipal park system. I see schools and universities such as the University of Hartford, or this is the Unitarian Church, the Village for Family and Children, the Yukon Law School, the Historical Society, stepping up to the plate because their constituents, because their members say, we should be conserving the North Branch, because these property owners, these institutional property owners, including St. Francis Hospital, own to the middle of the river along these riparian corridors, these smaller riparian corridors, most likely in your neighborhood too, are owned to the middle of the river. And in the past, these were places where people could swim in the city. These rivers were clean. The Park River, the North Branch of the Park River was listed as a Class A stream in 1970s, and it is now not swimmable, not fishable, not drinkable. So here again, this comparison of what was the 19th century vision of a park, Central Park. It was grand, it was large, it was a diverse place. It didn't necessarily have to be a square or a rectangle. It could be this windy link between the Back Bay and the Fens. And why?
Mary, as your timekeeper, just want to let you know we're at 7:40.
7:40. Okay,
Yep.
so I am almost done here. So why we have schools, we need to do this for the next generation. We need to connect nature and the city, and we can do this. This is the Mianus River Gorge, or the Mianus River, and it's a mosaic of different different organizations that have protected the landscape along the river. And again, we don't want to any more logging along the North Branch. What we'd like to see is the restoration of the forests, and we can be inspired because in the past, even in 1934, there were very few forests because this had been a farm. This is the University of Hartford, and here is the University of Hartford here. This patch of forest is probably right about there. So we see how if areas are left to restore, the forest can be restored. And why, again, I show this, but I'm going to keep moving. You've seen this. Why, again, because our resources are limited and we are building the nature of the future. And all the things you want to ask your elected officials to conserve and restore nature in the city. These are just a few pictures. This is a roof in Chicago, and this is this is actually a green infrastructure rill in Portland, Oregon. This is an area, parkland, that serves as flood control in Denver, Colorado. And this is a restoration of a stream in South Carolina. So those are just examples of all the ways that you can check in with your riparian corridor. This is actually in West Hartford, Trout Brook, a stream survey, a father and daughter. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So I asked folks to use either the chat function or the raise your hand function, and we'll call on folks with questions. Before we do that, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce Alicia Jenkins. She is an intern at Sierra Club Connecticut working on the Ready for 100 campaign, which is a Sierra Club effort to achieve 100% clean and renewable energy in cities and towns all over the country. She joined our team in Hartford. In August. She is a Hartford resident. She has hit the ground running. I think from Mary's presentation, you can see how interconnected the various aspects of climate and environment work are. So we're excited to be making this connection. And Alicia, if you want to, I might have to unmute you, give you an opportunity to just introduce yourself and why you're interested in working towards a more sustainable Hartford. Let me get you unmuted.
Okay. Hello. So why is it that I joined?
Yeah, what made you decide that you wanted to do this work with the Sierra Club in Hartford?
Okay, so what I'm doing with Ready for 100 to start the sustainability project here in Hartford. I'm starting with food insecurity first thing, because Hartford is notoriously food insecure, and I and Hartford is predominantly Black and Puerto Rican. So I'm looking to fight environmental racism. And that's why I joined Sierra Club. And that's why I joined specifically with the Ready for 100 campaign, to, fight against environmental racism in the city of Hartford, and to hopefully, as we go forward to make the city 100% sustainable, it will be equitable as well. So the people of the city can participate and having their city be green, and they can participate in the equity of that process. So that's why I'm here.
And we're so happy you're here. Yeah, so obviously lots of opportunities here to get involved with this work in the city of Hartford. And I'll plug into the chat emails for both Mary and Alicia if you would like to volunteer and do more with them. But I want to move to some questions. Mary, this has been focused on Hartford, but it's certainly just a case study, and we would expect to see the same situation throughout the state based on the maps.
You're wanting me to
Yeah, you
say,
want to speak to that?
you want me to speak to that? Yes, absolutely. I keep seeing that all over, and I think that the New York Times article about Richmond. I'm actually on the Urban Waters learning network with, and I've been with that group. It's the EPA with Rivers Network, and I've been with them for over 10 years. And I've watched, cities all over the country join and then share their stories. And absolutely, we're seeing the same patterns all over that. That there is, the heat island. In fact, actually, with respect to heat, I got involved in this work because of I started working on green roofs, and I'm a designer by training. And what green roofs were to me was how interesting and cool, right? Green roofs are. Well, they are literally cool. And it turns out that the money for some of the first green roofs in the United States came because of there was a heat wave in Chicago in, I think it was 1994, and it killed hundreds of people in the urban area because they would not open their windows, because they didn't feel safe, and they didn't have air conditioning, and elderly people just died in their homes because of the heat island. And so, and also, and this is less, of the NASA couldn't take pictures of Chicago and flight patterns, and there were a number of disruptions because of the urban heat island. And so 5 cities were selected for pilots, and Chicago chose the green roof. So I showed that picture of the green roof in Chicago with Chicago City Hall. And of course, I've been to the roof, and I've written about it. And this is a critical issue. And it's just that one of the things I realized, I worked on a green roof in New York City in 2000, and I started looking at the landscape around me, and I just thought, well, compacted land that was mowed over is not much better than an asphalt parking lot, frankly. And then and of course, I wasn't in New York City. My husband wasn't going to move to New York City, and I just started focusing on riparian corridors and what it really meant, the watersheds, because the other flip side to the green roofs was that they capture stormwater runoff. They capture 60 to 80 or more % of stormwater runoff, which is extremely critical in Chicago, because everything runs into the Lake Michigan, where they draw their drinking water, right? Whereas Connecticut does not draw the Connecticut municipalities by law cannot draw our drinking water out of an area where sewage or combined, stormwater runoff has flowed, even if it's treated. This is happening in the majority of places. I'm in Kansas City now. They're drawing water from a river that's upstream. Maybe the Missouri River has been through dozens of communities. And so, the effort to grow green infrastructure had led me to studying drainage issues. And then we wound up working on birds. And to go back to Alicia's point, what I've learned with the urban bird treaty is that birds are moving along these corridors, and it's all about food, and and where the food is, and what plants different birds eat, and that certain plants host certain insects, and they're not bothering us. And yeah, I'm so glad that Alicia is here, because the food aspect is what we don't see when we look at nature. That nature is food, which is one of the reasons why we need to remove invasive species and add natives to the landscape. It's because native species add 40% more food for our native species. So is that too long-winded?
Thanks, Mary. No, we love hearing you. Okay, a couple more questions here. I wonder if you might be able to answer. I'll read two. What is the status of dams and dam removal in Connecticut? And I wonder if that has any impact on the park watershed. And then secondly, can you say more about about recent learning about tribal lands that you alluded to during your talk?
Okay, first I'm gonna hit send right now, and in the chat I just put the link to the Governor's Council on Climate Change, just so people have that. So I just want to let people know that. And then I'm going to answer the first question first about the tribal lands. I do not know very much about the tribal lands, but I have to say I think it's beautiful that we are beginning to get that. And yeah, if we're not passionate about this, and I think the beauty of our in tribal people who are coming forward is that they bring heart and soul in, and walks. Like I am, they walk, the river walkers. I'm just learning this, but I was in Cleveland along the Cuyahoga River for the 50th celebration of the burning of the Cuyahoga and its revitalization. And, they had included tribal walks along the Cuyahoga, where people joined tribal leaders to just walk the river. And wow, I thought that is what a brilliant way to just help people feel what our nature is. So I don't intellectually have all the information, but I am so I'm so taken by it. What was the first question?
And the first one was, what is the status of dams and dam removal?
Oh, dams. Dam removal, it's interesting how there are dams. I mean, of course, there's the reservoir dams, and that for our drinking reservoirs, and the West Hartford dams. It's actually, I'd never thought of this before. Most of the dam removal is, say, on the recreational rivers, frankly, from what I can tell, because those recreational rivers are really where there's more fish habitat. I think on the Park River, because of the conduit, we know there are American eel migrate through the conduit, and there's some migratory aquatic species that are moving in and out of the conduit. But because of the entrances into the conduit, because of the flow, there's not a robust fish population. So a lot of dam removal, if it's not to improve a recreational river, it's to improve the migration of fish, aquatic life. And right now, because the low flows of the Park River and Trout Brook, the North Branch and the South Branch, Piper Brook. Those low flows have not supported the kinds of fisheries that have warranted focused dam removal.
Thanks, Mary. All right, we have 3 more questions and we have 6 minutes. Let's see if maybe we can answer them all. What other community and statewide organizations have you teamed up with?
Oh, well, we work with, I have to say, the educational, well, first of all, North Central Conservation District. Hello, thank you. They've been super to help us working on the 319 projects. I have Park Watershed got started as a project of the Farmington River Watershed Association, so we thank them very, very much. You know, I'm currently working with the New England Landscape Futures Project on, which is out of Harvard Forest with Trinity College. Trinity College has been wonderful over the years. You know, they're kind of episodic relationships with academic universities, like one of our founding board members was Sherry Buckborough from the University of Hartford. She was an art history chair, and we did a lot of great things, including bringing Mary Miss to University of Hartford. Right now, I took a walk with St. Joseph College students on Saturday, the 12th, and we've worked with, there's on our website, parkwatershed.org, I'll put that in there. We have our educational network. So it describes all the K through 12 schools that we've worked with in a report called Learning. I think I've given away all my copies right now, but learning to conserve and revitalize the North Branch of the Park River. And it's all the, like, Trinity College's K through 12 program, the Annie Fisher Nature School, it goes on.
Okay, next question. Next steps to create, what are the next steps to create a Park River Corridor park? I don't know if you've called it a park, but.
Well, I'm actually really motivating to try to get a lot through the GC3 to try to, because the governor lives in the North Branch. He drives over the North Branch every day. And I feel like his leadership could do a lot for us, right? That's so, and admittedly but in order to get someone at the top to make a decision like that, like let's see if we can bring interdisciplinary work together. And also the North Branch, the GC3 includes things like utilities, right? Well, there's a substation along the North Branch. It includes things like environmental justice. There's a brownfield, green jobs. We could create, all sorts of recreational activities through the revitalization of the brownfield and put a solar array on the top and connect it to the substation if there was a pilot, if there was motivation. So but I'm also talking to private landowners, and there is a hope for some carbon credits that we are looking into right now. So we welcome any help, because it's all based on research that can help nudge everything forward.
Great, Mary, and we will be sharing your information about the GC3 and happy to share with this group as well. I like what's happened here. There's a question and there's a little conversation happening, but I think the question also could be answered by you. Do you think the buried section of the Park River will ever be uncovered? And then one of the reactions here is Harbor Park in Meriden was uncovered to great benefit as part of flood control, creating an urban park.
Okay, so that's a whole presentation into itself. Of course, we have 2 minutes to do this. But number one, I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, so I lived in Providence. They removed the widest bridge in the world. When that article came out in 1990, I think it was 2004, Just Add Water in the Hartford Current. If I had $100 or even $50 for every time somebody said, let's uncover the underground portion first, instead of improving the Hartford neighborhoods that have the river in it, or improving the water quality that comes from upstream we would have an endowment. We would be able to do the work that we do. That media article that Hartford Courant article was so has misdirected so many people because there are 22 combined sewage overflows in that conduit. It is buried 60 feet below grade. It is integral to the structure of I-84. There's a 40-foot auxiliary conduit. It carries 78 square miles of a drainage basin. That is very different than what was in Providence, Rhode Island. In Providence, they removed the widest bridge in the world and remediated the banks. And it was there's a massive engineering difference. And the media has never corrected its error. And it is, I have to say, so frustrating because we need our rivers to be swimmable. I don't want to drive to Long Island Sound and swim in somebody else's neighborhood waters. I want a clean river in my neighborhood. And I want the media to cover those issues rather than whining about whether or not I get to drive to the Long Island Sound. Most people, 2/3 of the people in Hartford a third of the people in Hartford don't even have cars to drive to the Long Island Sound and try to get into somebody's wealthy neighborhood in Greenwich and go swim along the coast. We want clean water in our neighborhoods, which, by the way, it also includes the WNPR studios, and they could cover that issue and help us out.
So thank you so much, Mary. We're going to leave it there. That was a very passionate way to end. Thank you. I will capture the chat because there are some questions that perhaps we can take offline, including who needs volunteers. So we will get to that, Jay. I hope we can answer you by email. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yes, all our information's on parkwatershed.org, which I posted there. And then I posted the page that has our K-12 link. So if you go to our About page, you'll find my links. And Alicia and I are, another thing we hope to be working on is a food garden. That would be a great thing along both the North and the South branch, because not just a community garden, but also to recreate forageable landscapes like our tribal communities had forageable landscapes that are protected and healthy. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.